Hello there, welcome to Sludge Apologetics. Thanks for joining us. I hope you've got your Bibles and your notebooks and your hearts and your minds at the ready for today's message. Now you'll know that over 100 years ago, this ship, the Titanic, on its maiden voyage sank to the bottom of the sea. It was claimed to be unsinkable, but it only took one iceberg and a lot of carelessness made it to sink on its first voyage. That's in 1912. And now, just over 100 years since we saw the story of the Titan sub that went down on its way to see the wreck of the Titanic. I don't know if you've been following the story on the news, and it was it's an awful and a tragic event. And this Titan submersible, it was on its way down, had a catastrophic implosion, killing all the 5 passengers inside, including the CEO of the company, Stockton Rush. It was a tragedy that could have been prevented and avoided. The sub looked great on the outside, but inside there were critical flaws. It was made with materials that were not only incompatible with each other, but also incompatible with the pressures of the depths of the Titanic, which is 4,000 meters down in the ocean and 12,500 feet down. The whole vessel wasn't suited for that kind of depth. So the implosion was inevitable. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when it would implode. It had only been tested a few times, and there were problems and issues each time it went down, and that contributed to the structure of the sub, especially the cylinder, which was made from carbon fibre, an untested material in these depths, because every time it went down and up again, it compromised the durability of it. And so obviously it came to a critical point where it imploded at this time. The sub was made from off-the-shelf components. It was not very well made. It looked nice and it looked as though it was well made, but it couldn't withstand the pressures even of a normal submarine, a military submarine. It couldn't stand those depths. And it was controlled by a game controller, and not a good, durable one like those used in the military, but just a simple, cheap game controller for your online games and such. But the worst thing about it was that health and safety and emergency measures were not in place. It wasn't tested enough to ensure it could go down to those depths safely. And it was which is especially bad because it was designed for underwater tourism to see the Titanic, and there was $250,000 or pounds to go and see this wreck. And on the previous tests, they'd been aborted because of problems and issues with the sub. The whole thing could have been avoided, and it should have been, because it wasn't up to the job it was intended. Most trips were aborted because of different issues to do with the platform, to do with the communication with the boat above, and there were lots of other issues. The whole episode shows us that money may buy you toys and things and great adventures, but it cannot buy you wisdom. We have to ask God for wisdom. There was a video from last year, 2022, where a journalist went into the sub and he examined it, and you could see it all on the video. It looked sparse, it looked weak, it looked flimsy, uncomfortable. You sat on the floor of this capsule. There are a couple of computer monitors with their keyboards and the game controller. looked out of place. Even the reporter put his head in his hands like this when he saw this game controller. And a lot since have expressed their concerns and their worries about this thing and how dangerous it seemed when they went down on the capsule, and their relief of escaping this trip. The CEO, Dr. Rush, he was confident, full of himself, proud and defensive, and he was flippant and indifferent about safety and expertise. The vessel just didn't look up to the job, and it obviously wasn't. Now, foundations in anything, in building, business, any enterprise, are essential, and especially when you are selling it to the public, when you are selling it to people who want to be a part of this adventure. And so safety and emergency is important when you're doing that. We go on trips and holidays and excursions, and we check everything out before we go. We check we've got everything. We check things are safe for us. We get insurance, holiday insurance when we go. Just like when we go out of our houses for the day, we check that we've locked the doors and the windows, so we are confident that we've left everything okay behind us as we go on our trip or excursion or holiday. So, do you have a strong foundation in your life? Do you have a good and healthy, a strong worldview for what you believe, why you believe? Is this important? And we're going to look today at two parallel passages in Matthew and Luke. So let's go there, shall we? In first Matthew chapter 7. And it says from verse 24 in the English Standard Version. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Now there we can see that what mattered here in this passage was the foundation. Were you building on the rock, or were you building on sand? Also, it was about the wise man built on rock and the foolish man built on sand, because sand shifts and moves about with the water. It's not good to be building on it. So now let's go to the passage in Luke, verse 46. It says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And the flood arose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not do them is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. And so you can see in here in Luke that it was not so much about the foundation, but how well the house was built. Obviously, you do need a foundation. Each house was built differently, and how it was able to withstand the storm that came, the streams that come. So it wasn't much about that foundation, didn't have any foundation, not even sand. So we do need a good foundation, and we need to build well. We need to do things rightly according to standards. There are standards to which we should seek to meet. And again, especially if it's to do with giving a public service. Otherwise, you could be accused of being a scammer or a cheat, someone that's rogue selling knockoff things, things that aren't good, things that are not worth the money you're paying. Like I've just seen on the news about in Manchester about a load of counterfeit goods being sold, and they've been seized by the police, and they're all Gucci stuff and sportswear and things like that, and all counterfeit, look real but they're not, because there are a lot of shops selling these counterfeit goods. So we need a good foundation, and we need to build well, and we need that even if it's a weak foundation, we can still build well. Problems arise, it can continue to work if improvements are made. This Titan sub didn't have proper foundations. CEO, this Stockton Rush, he was a maverick. He was deluded, but he was just self-confident, full of himself, full of his ideas of innovation. He was a wannabe, but he was cavalier and careless about safety and emergency measures. He wanted to do it on his own, and with obviously his own company backing him up. I know that trips to the Titanic are still being advertised on their website at Ocean Gate. He ignored basics, and he ignored the advice of experts in this field.